Hey APUSH gang, good to see you guys this evening. I'm recording this on Tuesday evening for tomorrow's class. And let me make sure it's recorded. Yeah, it is. Okay. Got a lot for you today, so try to track with me. I have a couple of guests with me tonight. Woody from Toy Story has decided to join us. He's been hanging out in the corner and said he would like to join our class today, so he has a lot to share apparently. So we'll see what he has to say. And then, of course, Captain America is also hanging out with us. I don't know if you guys can see him. I'm just going to leave him in the corner. All right, so I have a lot to go over with you today. Some of it's related to the AP exam, so please pay close attention. I will probably communicate this information in an email form or on Google Classroom as well. Double checking to make sure this is recording. Yes, it is. Okay. I have this fear that I'm going to record an entire lesson and only put my glasses on to discover that it is not operating correctly. So hopefully that's not happening. That's not the case. So, all right, we are going to dive into period 7. And before we do that, this will be the last period that we're going to cover in APUSH because of time constraints and because the test does not go beyond period 7. So we don't need to go any farther. I had big plans to push us all the way to the Trump administration, but unless some sort of crazy event happens where our time is expanded significantly, which none of us really want, we're going to finish with period 7. So let me see here. Okay, so before we jump into our discussion about period 7, I want to talk to you guys about the APUSH AP US History exam. Mrs. Bowers, Dawn Bowers, our guidance counselor, has been doing a little bit of research about the test and spoken with myself and Mrs. Couch, who teaches AP Calculus, and then brought Mr. Mosley in on the conversation. She feels that the test is too narrow. It's not a fair test. It's one question over 250 years of history. And of course, I agree with her. However, in the case of U.S. history, or AP U.S. history, it isn't so much that you know the specifics, but that you can evaluate the documents and kind of figure out what they're asking and figure out how to address it. So with all that said, the administration is giving you permission to not take the AP exam if you do not want to. What that means is if you opt not to take this at home, or actually I guess we won't be at school, but on May 15th, if you choose not to take that online, open book, open note exam, DBQ essay, your score, your grade for my class will stand as it is when you finish with everything for my class. So if you have a B, you won't, and you decide not to take the AP exam, you won't get that 100% for a final exam. If you choose to take the test and you're sitting on an A, you're still going to get 100% on your final exam. It won't change your grade because you're already sitting in an A, but you might get AP credit, college credit. So you have to take into consideration a couple of things. Do you want to make an attempt to get college credit after enduring this year? Just why not take it? And just see if you can get college credit. Even if you did horrible on the test, because they throw a question at you that you have no idea what they're talking about, it's not going to do anything but help your grade in my class, and it might mean that you don't get college credit. The financial side of it is the test costs $94, I think that it is. I'll double check that, but I think it's $94 that you have to pay to, or I think you pay Lifeway and then we pay College Board. I need to look into that, but I'll get back with you on that once everybody decides what they want to do. So you take the test, you either get college credit or you don't get college credit. You either pass it and get college credit and get a bump in my class from a 100% final exam, or you choose not to take it and just take the grade that you get. You might even want to wait and see what your grade is in my class. If you don't want to take the test and you end up with an A, maybe you don't need to. I don't know what the deadline for paying the fee is, or if it's something we're paying up front. I think Dawn needs to know, Mrs. Bowers needs to know so that we can pay them. I'll work out those details. What I need for you to decide right now, in the next, I guess let's say think over the weekend. Do you want to take the new revised AP-DBQ exam, or do you not want to? If you decide you do want to take it, you will get a final exam score of 100%, which will average in with whatever your final grade is for the class. If you choose not to take the final exam, if you choose not to take the AP exam, your grade in my class will just be what it is when you finish that last test, which will be over period 7, and you won't get college credit. You won't have a chance to get college credit on it. Now, with that said, I do want to encourage you guys to take the CLEP exam, which basically would let you CLEP out of U.S. history in college. They're not offering them right now because of the COVID nonsense. They'll probably start offering them again in the summer. By that time, you'll be a little bit removed from the class. You may not remember or retain the information as well. It's just, one of those things. So anyway, if you have any questions about any of that, let me know. And let's just say that you talk to your parents about it. I will communicate probably in an email format and on our Google Classroom format. And you just let me know what you want to do. Do you want to take the exam, or do you not want to take the exam? I just wanted to make sure that you understood that you are not required to now. You used to be required to, you are now no longer required to under these bizarre circumstances. So, all right, so moving on. All right, period 7. All right, the first thing that I'm going to do today is I am going to ask you guys some questions related to previous lessons. If I'm going to assume right at this moment that all of you are planning on taking the AP exam. And so if you do decide to take the exam, you need to start going back and reviewing all of your material in your binders now. Okay? I'm going to throw out a couple questions right now to help you review. And what I'd like to see happen with this first question is, if you have access to your Google Classroom into the streaming page where you can add public comments, I want you to, as quick as you can, go to that streaming front page or the main page of Google Classroom for this class and type up the answer to this question, okay? And I'm going to give you guys extra credit for participating in this game, all right? So whoever is the quickest and has the best answer is going to get the most extra credit. Okay, the question is, got to find something. What was the significance that Benjamin Franklin contributed to the founding of America? What was Benjamin Franklin's contribution to the founding of America? Go. So I'm just going to sit here. You can pause the video. Okay. So I'm assuming you paused the video. I'm going to go check and see what you guys have contributed to the conversation. So that was question number 1, okay? That was from period number 3. Question number 2. Ooh, this is good. What were the Articles of Confederation? What were the Articles of Confederation? Put me on pause. Go fill out the Google, the streaming portion of your Google Classroom page, okay? Okay. All right, I'm going to check those out and see what you guys came up with. I've got one more for you. Okay. What convinced the remaining 13 states, the remaining of the 13 states, to adopt the new United States Constitution? What did James Madison promise the people of New York, the people of Virginia in particular, that he would do in the first Congress in order to get them to ratify the new Constitution? What did James Madison promise the state of New York and the state of Virginia that he would be responsible for in the first Congress if they adopted the new U.S. Constitution? All right? Put me on pause. Go fill in your answer. Okay. All right. Those are our 3 questions for today. So again, what was Benjamin Franklin's contribution to the founding of America? What were the Articles of Confederation? And what deal did James Madison make with the states of New York particularly and Virginia in order to convince them to ratify the new Constitution? All right, the answers to those questions are, of course, Benjamin Franklin is considered founding father. He was never a president. He was intimately involved in the, let's see here, the Continental Congress, the Second Continental Congress. He was a delegate from Pennsylvania. He lived in Philly. And he came to the Independence State House there, the Philly State House, and he was on the Declaration of Independence Committee. He helped Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and a couple of others craft that beautiful piece of legislation. He was a scientist. He was an inventor. He was the head of a bunch of philosophical associations. He was an Enlightenment thinker. And then, of course, he also was involved in the Constitutional Convention. He assisted the delegates in Philadelphia once again in putting their heads together and supported the new Constitution. He was also a delegate to an ambassador essentially to the French. He helped to craft the Treaty of Paris, which ended the American Revolution. So he was all over the place. So the second question was, I forgot. Oh, the Articles of Confederation. They were America's first, that document was America's first constitution. It was in effect from about, think about this, 1871. It was written by the Continental Congress during the American Revolution. And they finished it and ratified it about 1771, I believe, no, 1781, and it was in effect until 1788, and it collapsed because it didn't have an executive branch or a judicial branch, and Congress was unable to accomplish what it needed to accomplish. And so ultimately, the smart people in our country called for a constitutional convention really to reevaluate the articles and maybe amend it. But because it required all 13 states to amend it, they decided to ditch it and create a new constitution, which is the constitution that we have today. And then finally, James Madison's contribution or promise to the states of New York and Virginia in order to get them to convince them to ratify the new Constitution was he promised them that he would introduce a national or federal Bill of Rights as one of the first acts of the new Congress. That was one of the reasons they didn't want to vote for the new Constitution, because they were bothered by the fact that it didn't have a federal Bill of Rights. And so true to his word, New York and Virginia voted for the Constitution, and in the very first Congress, James Madison, who I believe was a member of the House of Representatives, put forward a Bill of Rights. There were actually 12 amendments. 10 of them made it through the ratification process and became the law of the land. Okay, moving on. I'm going to put those aside. Let's talk about period 7. All right, so period 7 is a huge period of time. It is the making of a modern America, putting America on the world map, empire building, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So a lot of things happen during period 7. Period 7 takes place from about 1890 to 1945. So there's going to be some overlap between American imperialism, some of the presidents, urbanization, the Gilded Age morphing into the Progressive Era. So there's going to be a lot of overlap there, and then we're going to kind of bust out of the gate and go into World War I and World War II. So the Depression, the Roaring '20s. So this particular period is full of stuff. Let's see here. APUSH, the College Board, defines the progressive period, which is what period 7 and it starts out on, or just in general, period 7. I'm sorry, let me repeat that. All of period 7. This is how it is defined. This period of time in American history is defined from 1890 to 1945. This was an increasingly pluralistic United States facing profound domestic and global challenges. They debated the proper degree of government activism and sought to define the United States' international role in the world. So let me say that again. Period 7 covers 1890 to 1945. This was an increasingly pluralistic United States which faced profound domestic, which means things at home, and global challenges, things away from our country. And they debated the proper degree of government activism or involvement and sought to define America's international role. Who were we to the world? What was our role? So this is going to be, period 7 is covered in chapters 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22. So it's 5 chapters. We're actually going to cover chapter 18 in one class period, actually 2 today, and then I'm going to cover it for you on Monday. Chapter 18 that we're talking about today specifically talks about the Progressive Era, and that's what we're going to touch on today. Chapter 19 is World War I. Chapter 20 is the Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression. Chapter 21 is Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal. Chapter 22 is World War II, and unfortunately that's where we're going to end our study of American history. I'm going to walk through the PowerPoint, and as always, I've said this probably 5 or 6 times, it's a good idea to print out the PowerPoint, anything that has text on it. I wouldn't print out all of the pictures per se, but anything that has text on it, and then use those PowerPoint notes as a way to write out the notes in addition, things that you want to add to. And then again, of course, watch my video lecture as we go. All right, the very first picture that you will see following that introduction of period 7 are women who are protesting, and it looks like, I'm trying to look at the picture really closely. I believe it's a suffrage parade where women are protesting or trying to draw attention to the fact that they still don't have the right to vote in this mass democracy culture. If you read the chapter or the pages that you were supposed to read, pages 677 to 688, the chapter opens up with a discussion on a terrible event that happened in New York City called the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire. Boy, it's a mouthful. And there is a little video clip, a film strip, picture and directions to watch this video clip. It's only about 3.5 minutes long. I found some others, but I just wanted you to watch one that was short and sweet. America, the Story of Us has a really good 10-minute cut on this particular incident, but I couldn't find it. So anyway, if you would stop, watch that video clip, that 3-minute clip, and then jump back into this. But this is an event that took place in New York City in 1911. Unfortunately, over 140 women lost their lives. It was reminiscent, actually the video says that it was the worst workplace catastrophe in New York City until September 11th. And the way the book describes it and the way that I've heard it described is that because there was no way out in the fire for the women that were working up there, they began jumping out of the windows to their death. And it, again, was very reminiscent, personally to me, of 9/11 and seeing people jumping out of those towers. There's no video footage of that happening in 1911, but there are all kinds of pictures on the internet of ladies that were, after they jumped out, they were pulled to the sidewalk and they were dead, and police are standing around them. Some of them had no identification on them, and they were left out so people could come and identify them. Very, very, very sad. The picture that I have in my PowerPoint is actually of a number of them in their caskets, open caskets, for the people of New York City to come and see. Now, the Progressive Era in general is a period of time that marks out or highlights the discrepancies between, again, the rich and the poor, specifically in the urban areas like New York City. And this case in general was involved a number of immigrant women, probably not making a whole lot of money, not able to be part of a union, who had protested with other unionized factories for things like better working conditions, protection, fire protection, all kinds of stuff. Had those things been in place, they probably wouldn't have died. But unfortunately, because the boss man didn't want them leaving and going on breaks when they weren't supposed to, he had locked the door effectively from the outside, and so there was no way for them to get out other than the elevator, which was limited. And so many of them jumped to their deaths, and many of them burned in the upper floors of the building. And so the people of New York were, I would say, awakened to the working conditions of these folks, and they came by the thousands to participate in kind of a huge mass funeral. And it took a long time for all of the funerals. And so there's a picture here of the people of New York walking, I believe it's in a warehouse, and looking at the faces of these young women in their caskets. It's a really kind of a disturbing yet thoughtful or emotional picture. So anyway, make sure that you watch the video clip on that. Okay, what I've done, there were lots of powerful quotes and sections and sentences in this particular section that you read, and so I pulled out a few of those and I put them in a text box. The first slide after that picture of the gals in their caskets is a picture of the Lower East Side of Manhattan, where those immigrants were squished in like sardines, living there, just a few blocks away from Fifth Avenue's Millionaire Row. On page 677, it says, severe inequality remained the most visible feature of the urban landscape, and persistent labor strife raised anew the question of government's role in combating social inequality. And so the progressive era is going to be dominated with that thought in mind. There was a severe inequality that was very visible to the average person, particularly in these urban areas amongst immigrant populations. And what were we going to do about it? What were we as a people going to do about the inequality? And that is where the progressive era, or the idea of the progressive era, enters. People were finally motivated to make change, to make progress, and that's where that word comes from. Okay, so the book defines progress. This is straight out of your book. A loosely defined political movement of individuals and groups who hoped to bring about significant change or progress in America's social and political life. That's on page 678. And this is how they were going to change things. This is how this change was going to come back. And they list three things that took place during the progressive era that were concrete ways that groups or people sought change in America. The first thing is, during the progressive era, there was a reinvigoration of the women's suffrage movement. So it had gotten kind of quiet for a while, especially during the fight with the civil rights amendments, and people kind of got comfortable with the way things were. But so during the progressive era, there's a reinvigoration of the women's suffragette movement. Second, the use of political power to expand workers' rights was encouraged. And essentially that's just kind of code for, I think it's okay if the government begins regulating things. I think it's time for the government to get involved. Remember, for a long time it was, oh, hands off, we're not going to let the government get involved. It's all about liberty of contract and that sort of thing. But during the progressive era, people began to get comfortable with the government sticking their hands into private businesses and saying, no, that is not a proper way to treat a human being. And no, you can't work them 48 hours a day. And no, you can't have 2-year-old children working on the floor of a factory. Those, I'm exaggerating. But during the progressive era, people became comfortable with the idea of government intervention. And then third, there were efforts to improve democratic government by breaking the power of those crooked city bosses and giving more power in the legislative process to the people. And so the system was pretty corrupt. It was corrupt in government. It was corrupt at the city political boss level, and people were fed up with it. And so they began to try to break out of that and to call people to account for that. The next PowerPoint says, this is from page 678, an urban age and a consumer society. So during this progressive era, you are going to see America become a consumer society. If you think all the way back to, as John Green says, the era where Thomas Jefferson believed that America was going to be an agrarian society, living on farms and taking care of themselves and their own families, America is not that America anymore. Farmers have moved to the cities, or they have supported the city industrial system by feeding the masses. America is definitely becoming a consumer society. And what I mean by that is we want to buy things. We like to live in cities and we like to buy things. And nothing's really changed. We are certainly still a consumer society. Excuse me. That is still the case. I'm in shock that New York City is still shut down. New York City today is kind of the quintessential consumer society. We're a consumer society. When we can't go out to the stores, we get on Amazon and we buy things. We think of things we can buy. And so that's very much a part of who we are as Americans. And so the quote that I pulled out of the book says, the progressive era was a period of explosive economic growth, fueled by increasing industrial production, a rapid rise in the population, primarily from immigration, and the continued expansion of the consumer marketplace. And so we're going to see that take place. Now there's a picture in here that shows that discrepancy that continued to grow during the same time frame. A picture of Manhattan's Millionaire Row, and I believe that is Mr. Vanderbilt's house on the corner. And then a comparison with Lower East Manhattan and how many people were living there. I think the book says that there were more people living in that small area of land than if you were to go to like Calcutta, India today. And so even the poorest among us, we're finding pleasure in those abilities to purchase even the smallest things. And so the goal was to get a job, to increase your standard of living, and to live the American dream, to live the American standard, to be able to have a little bit money at the end of your paycheck, to do more than put food on the table. Some, that's all they were able to do, but the goal was to be able to consume, to purchase, to buy. This era, the progressive era, was full of problems related to child labor. There was a move during the progressive era to pass laws that would protect children. There are some classic images in the PowerPoint, very young girls and boys working in some of those textile factories. Some pictures of women working in a textile factory. And then the next section that the book talks about are the muckrakers. The muckrakers, Teddy Roosevelt famously said they were always muckraking, basically looking for something to dig up. These were journalists, sometimes photographers, who used their craft to, today we would probably call them investigative reporters. They sense that there's something wrong, and sometimes they go undercover, sometimes they have sources, but they find out, they get the dirt on whatever's happening. And then they will use the power of print, the power of images, the power of the press, and during this era, that a lot of them published their stories in magazines. Magazines were a fairly significant mass consumption as well. They were cheap, they were colorful, they had advertisements in them, they had things you could buy in them, and then they have these editorials in them as well. And so there were several journalists that were famous during this time. Ida Tarbell was one of them, who wrote about, I think, the Vanderbilts. I can't remember right now, but I think it was the Vanderbilts. And then probably the most famous was a guy by the name of Upton Sinclair. He was a young man who believed that the meat packing factories and plants, especially in America's largest cities, were probably killing Americans because they were so unsanitary. And so he went undercover, and the things he discovered were unbelievable. Everything from human body parts being chopped off and put in the pie with the rest of the gross meat, to rat droppings, to vats of drained blood from meat that would sit in the alleyways for weeks on end. Just unbelievable stuff. And so at the end of the lesson today, what I'd like for you to do, I have about a 2-page excerpt from the book, The Jungle. And there's 4 or 5 questions at the end of it, but I don't want you to answer the questions. Not that that's not the purpose of it. I actually had the other class do that. But I just want you simply to read it. I'm going to ask you about it on Monday. It's just horribly sickening to think that those were the conditions. That was the meat that was being produced that people were purchasing at stores, at meat markets. Pretty horrible. It's amazing. People, I would imagine that the bacteria in their bodies, the tuberculosis, TB was a real big problem back then, was probably rampant in large part because of the way these factories were run. The book might address this. I need to get a drink of water. A little bit later, but Teddy Roosevelt, when he became president, he's considered the first progressive president. He read The Jungle, and he was suspicious. He was not necessarily sure that Upton Sinclair was on the up and up, and so he had him to the White House, and he talked to him about it, and he began to be convinced that what he had written about was indeed true, and so he told Upton Sinclair, I'm going to do some of my own investigation, and if what you say is true, I'm going to act on it. And as a result of Teddy Roosevelt's investigations, he came to realize that it was indeed true. And so he encouraged Congress to pass the Meat Inspection Act, the Pure Drug and Food Act, a bunch of things where the federal government reaches into those industries and begins to regulate them and force them into a certain pattern, behavior pattern for the benefit of the consumer, because it was clearly dangerous. And so I personally think that's an example where it was a good thing that the government intervened, because a lot of people would have gotten sick and died and blah. So I have a fairly high threshold or confidence in my life that when I go purchase meat somewhere, I'm not going to get sick. Every now and then that does happen in our consumer society, but generally we're in pretty good shape compared to the rest of the world. So those were the muckrakers. There's a short little section in the reading that you did about immigration. Again, it continued to talk about the fact that most of the immigrants during this era were coming from Eastern Europe and Russia and Austria-Hungary, especially leading up to World War I. Essentially, immigration ceased in 1914 with the advent of World War I. I don't know if you guys are paying attention to the news, but President Trump is signing an executive order probably tonight, effectively closing off all immigration to the United States until this coronavirus stuff goes away and Americans are steady back in work again. So it was for two reasons: to protect Americans against incoming coronavirus. That was one. And the second part of it is that Americans are losing jobs, and the idea that immigrants would come in and take those jobs when Americans are going to be in a situation where they need to get employment again for those that have lost their jobs, this would be a good time to just halt immigration. And so he's signing that executive order this evening. I don't know when the last time a president actually ceased all immigration. This might be the first time since 1914. I may check into that, I'm not sure. But anyway, there's a picture here that shows the three of the primary entrances into the United States during this time of high immigration. Ellis Island, of course, is right outside by the Statue of Liberty in New York. That's where the European immigrants came in. In San Francisco Bay Harbor was Angel Island. That is where the Asian immigrants came through. Their passage into America was much tougher than coming through Ellis Island. They oftentimes were detained for long periods of time, interrogated a little bit, whereas Ellis Island immigrants, 5 or 6 hours, answering a few questions, getting a quick medical exam. If everything looked good, they could pay, I think it was $25, and prove that they didn't have any kind of criminal records, which I don't know how you prove that, and that you have a place to stay. They let you come on through. So different experiences. During the years of 1900 to 1930, over 1 million Mexicans came into the United States legally through El Paso. I think the book says that was 10% of the population of Mexico at the time. The Mexican Revolution was in 11, and so lots of instability, lots of Mexicans came into America during that time. And then there are several slides in here that I threw in there from one of my lessons with the other class that really put a face on mass consumerism, mass consumption, the consumer society. The other book calls it mass culture. where people are beginning to do things. They're starting to take their extra bit of money and they're using it for entertainment purposes. And so this whole entertainment industry kind of comes to the surface during the progressive era. The book talked a little bit about Nickelodeons. And so if you would just go through these pictures, the first picture is the Chicago World Exposition in 1893 with the very first Ferris wheel. That Ferris wheel could hold thousands of people. It was built to rival the Eiffel Tower, the Eiffel Tower was built for a World Fair, and it's still standing. Our Ferris wheel only lasted about 10 years. Coney Island, New York. The first roller coaster was in Coney Island, New York. Really, really cool picture. Take a close look at it. And people in the era, the clothes that they're wearing, the women have the big hats. They're wearing the triangle, shirt waist, where basically they're triangle shaped blouses. Really, really cool. And then there's two little video clips. One of them shows the Ferris wheel from the World Exposition at another park, but the same Ferris wheel. And one of them, but anyway, there's two little short video clips. They're each a minute long. I want you to watch those two video clips. They are really, really cool old video. The next slide talks about the rise and increase of purchases of bikes for leisure, especially for women, giving them the opportunity to get out and go quite a distance from their homes, gave them some independence, riding bikes. However, the skirts were a problem. It's where eventually you're going to see women wearing pants. In 1890 alone, 10 million bikes were sold in the United States. In 1900, couple of significant food items went on the market for sale. By 1900. Sorry, y'all. I don't have coronavirus. Allergies are bad today, though. Coca-Cola began to be sold to the public in 1886, and so there were all kinds of advertisements about buying a refreshing Coca-Cola. Hershey chocolate bars went on the market in 1900. Spectator sports became popular. Baseball, 1903 with the very first World Series between the Boston Pilgrims and the Pittsburgh Pirates. In 1920, the Negro Baseball League was formed. Vaudeville theaters, the book talked about those. Song, dance, juggling, slapstick, comedy, chorus line. This was where a lot of black entertainers got their foot in the door. They were called vaudeville. Take a look at those pictures. Let's see, the circus, Barnum and Bailey Circus, the greatest show on earth. They would come into town by railroad, and then they would do these huge parades through the city, passing out flyers, encouraging people to come to the show. Motion pictures, again, that Nickelodeon. They were called Nickelodeons because they cost 5 cents to view. The very first modern film came out in 1903. It was called The Great Train Robbery. And there is a film strip clip there. I want you to watch the very first modern film. It's a silent film. I think it has, no, I don't think this one has. If you went to the show, a lot of times they would have somebody in the back playing usually an organ type instrument to give effect to the show. But this is a silent film effectively. So I want you guys to watch it as well. It's about 10 minutes long. But it is fascinating. The kids last year, Landon Higgins in particular, wanted to do a voiceover of it for extra credit, and we thought about doing it, but then we ran out of time. When you watch it, you can understand why it would be quite funny to do. Urban shopping centers began to pop up around America's largest cities. The picture of the one here in 1890, it was called the Arcade, and it looks a lot like Union Station in Washington, D.C. And I know you guys went there when you went to Washington, D.C. But essentially, this particular mall was 3 or 4 stories high, and then they covered it up with a glass ceiling, and it was called the Arcade. Department stores became, actually right after the Civil War, the very first department store was Marshall Field in Chicago. The tagline, or the advertising tagline for that store was, "Give the lady what she wants," because it's only ladies that shop. Let's see here. Chain stores became popular. One of the most popular chain stores at the time, Walmart would be considered a chain store, or Target, or Costco, or Walgreens. One of the very first ones was called Woolworth. They had 596 stores selling more than $1 million a week by 1911. Okay, these are all evidence of this consumer society. And then there's a couple of slides that show you some of the advertisements. Advertisements were primarily targeted towards women. So like for instance, let's see here. By 1900, advertisers were spending almost $100 million a year on products in magazines and newspapers. And one of the big ways they advertised was on trains. Trains that would go by. They would advertise everything from medicine to soaps to baking powders, but almost always they were targeted to women. There's pictures here of Jell-O and Listerine. All of them have pictures of women on it. Catalog shopping became a really big deal during this era as well. Montgomery Ward, Sears, and Roebuck. In 1896, most of those companies offered free rural delivery. And so if you lived out in the middle of nowhere, you could order something by catalog and it would be delivered to you for free. That we call that Amazon Prime in our family. By 1910, there were 10 million Americans that were shopping by mail. So Amazon thought they had come upon something new, but in reality they haven't. Okay, let's see here. The next slide has a picture of a lady. It's a Coca-Cola advertisement, and it says, "The ideal brain tonic. Great for a headache. Delightful for summer and winter beverages. It relieves mental and physical exhaustion." Probably because it had cocaine in it initially. Okay, so the quote from the book says, "Economic abundance would eventually come to define the American way of life, in which personal fulfillment was to be found through acquiring material goods." Great quote. Then the book also talks about women in the workforce. There's just an iconic photo that you'll see here of a woman in front of a typewriter. Women had always worked in the domestic industry, working for people in their homes as maids and that sort of thing, especially black women. During this progressive era from 1900 to 1915, 1916, a lot of women entered the workforce in office capacity, working in the offices, typewriters, that sort of typing and that sort of thing. It was very empowering for women. In fact, I want to read this to you guys. Hopefully you read this and you were as equally as thought it was as funny as I did. Actually, I put "ouch" next to it. So this quote on page 685 about women. It says that a growing number of young women who desired a lifelong career, wrote Charlotte Perkins Gilman in her influential book, Women and Economics, offered evidence of a spirit of personal independence that pointed to a coming transformation of both economic and family life. And then it went on to say, Gilman's writing reinforced the claim that the road to woman's freedom lay through the workplace. In the home, she argued, women experienced not fulfillment, but oppression. And the housewife was an unproductive, these are her words, parasite, little more than a servant to her husband and children. By condemning women to a life of domestic drudgery, prevailing gender norms made them incapable of contributing to society or enjoying freedom in any other meaningful sense of the word. Ouch. Goodness gracious. So this definitely is fueled by the suffrage movement. And then there's a whole section in this chapter that I'm going to review with you on Monday about the new feminism, the sexual revolution that took place during this era, which is actually quite shocking for the era that it happened in. And then real quickly, I'm going to just zip through this. Fordism. There's a section in here that talks about the influence of Mr. Ford during this era. And this is the definition of Fordism. The economic system based on mass production and mass consumption came to be known as Fordism. And you know the story. He could have produced fewer cars and made them fancier and out of reach of the average person. But he said that people that work in factories should be able to afford the things that they make. And so he came up with the idea of an assembly line production in which cars were made for much cheaper, and therefore they were much cheaper or more affordable to purchase for the average worker. I think the book said it costs about $350 for a person to purchase a car, a Model T. And then finally, there is a last couple slides here. Talks about the American standard of living. The consumer economy gave rise to the concept like A Living Wage and An American Standard of Living, that offered a new language for criticizing the inequalities of wealth and power in the Progressive Era America. And then the slide here says, for the rest of class, I'd like for you to read the excerpt of The Jungle that is included with today's assignment. Don't need to answer the questions at the end, just read them. And then your homework for between Wednesday and Monday, if you do decide you want to take the test, I would definitely start reviewing your old material. But other than that, the only thing that I want you guys to do is to watch John Green's crash course on the Progressive Era. It's number 27, and I've got a link to it. So no reading. You're probably going, yoo! No reading between now and Monday unless you're just preparing for the test. I want you guys to have a little bit of a mental break. I'm still trying to get caught up. I'm going to review the rest of chapter 18 for you. You don't need to read it. I'm going to kind of give you the most important parts of it. So I think that's it. Love you guys, and let me know your thoughts on taking that test. Okay, bye.